Scenario 14. Culture. Real Scene 4. Political structures. Democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Abraham Lincoln. My objectives for this scenario are to use appropriately the passive to describe processes with be and modals, also to learn defined and non-defined relative clauses, and to understand the structure of the state in modern society.
Introductory questions. Number 1. What are the political structures? Number 2. What does the legislature branch do? Number 3. What is the executive role?
Introduction. The modern state is established around the doctrine of separation of powers, in which the legislative, executive and judicial branches of government are distinct from one another to prevent abuse of power. The doctrine traces back to ancient Greece and was further developed by English and French philosophers. In the United States Constitution, the phrase separation of powers never appears, but is clearly implied by the structure of the Constitution. Therein, all legislative powers are vested in a Congress of the United States. The executive power is vested in the President of the United States, and the judicial power is vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Each branch has powers that restrain the other branches in a system of checks and balances that are designed to prevent the concentration and abuse of power. Legislative branch. It is a governmental deliberative assembly with the power to adopt laws. Legislatures are known by many names, including Parliament, Congress, Diet, and National Assembly. In parliamentary systems of government, the legislature is formally supreme and appoints the executive. In presidential systems of government, the legislature is considered a power branch which is equal to and independent of the executive. In addition to enacting laws, legislatures usually have exclusive authority to raise taxes and adopt the budget and other money bills. The consent of the legislature is also often required to ratify treaties and declare war. Chambers. The primary component of a legislature is one or more chambers or houses, which are assemblies that debate and vote upon bills. Most legislatures are either bicameral or unicameral. A unicameral legislature is the simplest kind of lawmaking body and has only one house. A bicameral legislature possesses two separate chambers, usually described as an upper house and a lower house, which may differ in duties, powers, and method for the selection of members. In most parliamentary systems, the lower house is the most powerful house, while the upper house is merely a chamber of advice or review. However, in presidential systems, the power of the two houses are often similar or equal. In federations, it is typical for the upper house to represent the component states. For this purpose, the upper house may either contain the delegates of state governments, as in the case of Germany, and was the case in the pre-19th century United States, or to be elected according to a formula that grants disproportionate representation to smaller states, as is the case today in Australia and the United States. Historically, as well as bicameral and unicameral bodies, there have also been rare instances of tricameral legislatures. Many legislatures are said to include not just one or more houses, but also the head of state. This is because in most systems it is necessary that, after being approved by the House or Houses of the legislature, a bill receive the assent of the head of state before it can become law. This may be the case even if, as in the case of many parliamentary systems, the assent of the head of state is merely a formality and will not be withheld. It is also common, however, for the head of state not to be considered a formal part of the legislature, even if they have power to veto laws. the British Parliament formally consists of the Crown and 2 houses. Similarly, the Irish Oireachtas consists officially of the President and 2 houses. In contrast, the United States Congress consists only of its 2 houses and does not officially include the US President, despite the fact that he wields a veto. Competences. The power of legislatures varies widely from country to country. Rubber-stamped legislature is a derogatory name for a legislature that has no real power, but simply approves, by unanimous or near-unanimous votes, bills put before it by other institutions. For example, the legislatures of many communist states were often derided as mere rubber stamps for decisions of the ruling party. The term is not usually used to describe legislatures of parliamentary systems. Although the final draft of a legislation introduced by the government almost always passes, these legislatures are generally not labelled rubber stamps because legislators are involved in the drafting and amendment of bills.
Conversation. Listen and practice.
Working in politics must be really exciting.
Oh yeah, but it's also very hard work. You have to spend a lot of time in campaign.
Why is that?
Well, you have to visit many places, prepare speeches, and talk to people all the time.
So, what kind of strategies are used?
There are so many strategies to get votes from people. It depends on what you want to communicate.
I didn't realize that.
Why don't you come with me? I'm going to visit some electors next week. I'm preparing my campaign.
Great! I'd love to join you.
Grammar structure 1. Passive describing process. Most of the time, the passive is used to describe how something is used, made, or done. Be plus past participle. Each politician isn't loved. Only the good ones are loved. Modal plus be plus past participle. All of them should be loved. Many of them have to be dismissed. Writing. Exercise. Match the sentences in column A with the corresponding sentence in column B. A. 1. Gasoline prices. 2. 5 people. 3. This jacket. 4. Smoking. 5. The telephone. 6. The old theatre. B. A. Is currently being rebuilt. B. Has been disconnected. C. Is not permitted anywhere in the station. D. Were killed in the rally. E. Was made in China. F. Have been raised. The executive. Under the doctrine of the separation of powers, the executive is the branch of a government charged with implementing or executing the law and running the day-to-day affairs of a government or state. The de facto most senior figure in an executive is referred to as the head of government. The executive may be referred to as the administration in presidential systems or simply as the government in parliamentary systems. In some constitutional monarchies, such as the United Kingdom, the monarch, who is the head of state, is the de jure and theoretical head of the executive, and the Prime Minister, who he or she technically appoints, is the head of the monarch's government, i.e., Her Majesty's government. In practice, however, a symbolic or figurehead head of state does not actively exercise executive power, though decisions may be formally made in his or her name. Along with the Prime Minister or executive president, the executive branch consists of the cabinet and the executive departments or ministries of the government. Executives around the world. Executive authority within a presidential system is exercised by a president who is also head of state. The president will not usually be designated by the legislature and may instead be elected directly, or in the case of the President of the United States, indirectly by an electoral college. Under presidential systems, the legislature and the executive are formally distinct, and it is usually expressly forbidden for the president and other executive officers to be members of the legislature. In parliamentary systems, the executive branch is generally comprised of a prime minister and a cabinet, who must directly or indirectly secure the support of the legislature. In a semi-presidential system such as France, for example, executive powers are shared between the President and the Prime Minister. The executive role. It is usually the role of the executive to enforce the law. To achieve this, the executive administers the prisons and the police force and prosecutes criminals in the name of the state, conduct the foreign relations of the state, command the armed forces, appoint state officials including judges and diplomats, administer government departments and public services, issue executive orders, also known as secondary legislation, ordinances, edicts, or decrees. Many constitutions require that certain executive powers may only be exercised in conjunction with the legislature. For example, often the consent of the legislature is required to ratify treaties, appoint important officials, or to declare war. In the United Kingdom, however, the executive is exempt from most such limitations under the royal prerogative. Grammar Structure 2. Relative clauses. Defining relative clauses explain or identify the person you are talking about. A candidate advisor is a person. He gets the speeches ready for the candidate. A candidate advisor is the person that gets the speeches ready for the candidate. Non-defining relative clauses give further information about someone. A candidate advisor gets the speeches ready for the candidate. A candidate advisor is often relatively experienced in politics. A candidate advisor who is often experienced in politics gets the speeches ready for the candidate. Writing. Exercise. Look at the following sentences. In some, the relative pronoun that stands for a person and can be replaced by who. In others, that stands for a thing and can be replaced by which. Write who or which in brackets. 1. A man presides over the Senate. What's the name of the man? 2. Some things were stolen. Have you got back the things? 3. I left some money on the table. The money seems to have disappeared. 4. You read things in the Congress newspaper. You shouldn't believe all the things. 5. You went to the court for a petition right. They cannot provide the petition. The judicial power. In the United States, the power to decide cases and controversies is vested upon the Supreme Court and inferior courts established by Congress. The judges must be appointed by the President with the advice and consent of the Senate, hold office for life, and receive compensations that may not be diminished during their continuance in office. If a court's judges do not have such attributes, the court may not exercise the judicial power of the United States. Courts exercising the judicial power are called constitutional courts. Congress may create legislative courts, which frequently take the form of quasi-judicial agencies or commissions whose members do not have the same security or tenure or compensation as the constitutional court judges. Legislative courts may not exercise the judicial power of the United States. In Murray's Lessee v. Hoboken Land and Improvement Company, 1856, the Supreme Court held that a legislative court may not decide a suit that the common law or in equity or in admiralty, as such a suit is inherently judicial. Legislative courts may only adjudicate public rights questions, cases between the government and an individual involving political determinations. Courts check both the executive branch and the legislative branch through judicial review. This concept is not written into the Constitution, but was envisioned by many of the Constitution's framers. For example, the Federalist Papers mention it. The Supreme Court established a precedent for judicial review in Marbury v. Madison. There were protests by some at this decision, born chiefly by political expediency, but political realities in the particular case paradoxically restrained opposing views from asserting themselves. For this reason, precedent alone established the principle that a court may strike down a law it deems unconstitutional.
A common misperception is that the Supreme Court is the only court that may determine constitutionality. The power is exercised even by the inferior courts, but only Supreme Court decisions are binding across the nation. Decisions of a Court of Appeals, for instance, are binding only in the circuit over which the court has jurisdiction. The power to review the constitutionality of laws may be limited by Congress, which has the power to set the jurisdiction of the courts. The only constitutional limit on Congress's power to set the jurisdiction of the judiciary relates to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court may exercise only appellate jurisdiction except in cases involving states and cases affecting foreign ambassadors, ministers, or consuls. The Chief Justice presides in the Senate during a president's impeachment trial. The rules of the Senate, however, generally do not grant much authority to the presiding officer. Thus, the Chief Justice's role in this regard is a limited one.
Research Spot. Look for more information about Number 1. Authoritarianism. Number 2. Monarchies. Number 3. Democracy.